So for almost 10 years, I've been cooking barbecue on pretty much exclusively an offset smoker. And when I'm not cooking on an offset, I'm typically using charcoal and wood chunks. And when it comes to pellets in general, I've eaten my fair share of pellet cooked barbecue, but I've never really cooked on one. So I've used them to smoke sausage at my barbecue classes, and they've turned out really good. I really enjoyed those. Good color, good smoke flavor. But I've never really been in full control of a pellet cooker cooking something like a brisket, where I get to decide how long I cook it for, how much smoke flavor it gets, all that kind of stuff. But thankfully, SoCal in Southampton hooked me up with a Traeger Ironwood 885. Is that an 885? 885 pellet cooker, so I'm able to put pellets to the test for myself and hopefully get rid of any of those assumptions that I had, maybe those biases that I had, cook for myself, cook a brisket, and see if I can make one that stands up to what I think I can cook on an offset. And I'm gonna do everything that I possibly can to make this brisket the best I can possibly make it. And obviously I'm gonna show you all of the things that I'm gonna do in order to hopefully make this brisket come out as best as possible and as close to an offset smoked brisket as I can. Offset smokers clearly being the best possible way of barbecuing. So what I have here is a pretty standard UK grass-fed brisket. Although I say it's standard, I think it's some of the best grass-fed briskets that you can get. It's an XM Gold from John Davidson's, and I'm just gonna trim it up exactly like I would any other brisket. You've probably seen me do this quite a few times. I'm doing this the night before because one of the things that I consistently find to be a problem, or what I perceive to be a problem with pellet cooked briskets, is that the bark never seems to be that good. You always kind of get like a brown or mahogany colored bark, and I like a really dark black bark on my brisket. I like to season up the night before, set it in the fridge on a wire rack, and I do think that that is going to help with establishing a bark nice and early, and I think that's going to be very important on the pellet grill. All of this trim is going to go into burgers and sausage, so don't worry about that. This brisket has a huge flat on it and not much of a point, which is a bit annoying, but we'll work with it. I often notice that pellet grill cooked briskets generally don't have the best fat rendering, so I'm going to go a little bit thinner on my fat cap than I would on an offset smoked brisket, but I'm not going to change up my process too much. And there we go, a super quick trim. All I really did was try to make it as aerodynamic as possible, because even though we're not cooking with a high convection cooker, we don't want anything sticking out because it still may burn. So I've tried to round it off as much as I could. 2 parts pepper to 1 part salt. And I'm using Diamond Crystal Kosher salt and the Kirkland brand from Costco coarse black pepper. And there we go. This is gonna go into the fridge overnight. It's gonna hang out on a wire rack. It's gonna dry the surface out a little bit. There's gonna be a little bit of dry brining action going on, not a huge amount, but it will dry out the surface of the brisket just enough that I think that bark is gonna set up nice and early. Into the fridge it goes. So the brisket's been resting overnight. We're going on about 7 AM in the morning. We're using Lumberjack pecan pellets. I've heard they're pretty good. And as you can see, the brisket has kind of dried out a little bit. It's going to be the perfect surface for bark to build up nice and early. And we're going in with a cold smoke, so 165 Fahrenheit for the first couple of hours. This is just to build good smoke flavour and good colour before we get into the actual cook. I personally think that this is key for helping to get that nice dark bark, and it's going to help with some of that smoke flavour that the pellet grill might be lacking. So after about 2 hours of cooking at 165 Fahrenheit using the super smoke function on the Traeger, I'm bumping this up to 225, and I'm going to cook here again on super smoke for around another 3 hours. Right, so this brisket has been on for about 5 hours. We've bumped the temperatures up to 250 Fahrenheit. It's looking a little bit on the dry side in places, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a spritz with some water and some soy sauce. But overall, it's looking pretty good. Not too crunchy, and all I'm trying to do at the moment is build bark, build colour, build flavour, just let that keep going. So we're about 6.5 hours into this cook, and this brisket is looking good. Oh, the racks don't come out. Nice colour, bark on there. Have been giving it a little spritz every now and then. Nothing too much, just where it's starting to dry out a little bit. And what I am going to do now is spin this around. I'm not really too sure how these Traegers cook in terms of evenness. Rolling at 250, going to keep going there for another couple of hours, probably another 2 hours. Then maybe crank it up to 275. May wrap it, may not. No fat render yet, not even remotely. Underside doesn't feel too bad, given that this is a bottom-up heat cooker. Looking good so far. Better bark than I thought we'd get. So the brisket's been on for about 8 hours now, bearing in mind that 2 of those hours we were running at 165 Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna bump this up to 275 for the next couple of hours, looking to start rendering some of that top fat. It's a little bit weird, a little bit unusual for me because it's not a top-down cooker like an offset, which I'm used to. It's a bottom-up cooker in terms of where the heat is coming from. So that top fat, that fat cap is not rendering quite like it normally would, but I'm pretty sure it'll be fine. And for everyone who says cook fat side down on Traegers where the heat source comes from, I'm not about that. I don't want to, I'm not going to. So I'm always trying to get the best out of a fat up brisket, regardless of what I'm cooking on. So we are about 11 hours into this brisket cook, and hopefully you can see we've got a nice bar, good fat render. In terms of tenderness, obviously, as always, I'm gonna check the center of the flat, and we're a little bit far off. This being a UK grass-fed brisket, what I'm gonna do for a little bit of insurance is just foil boat it. And I'm gonna foil boat it over, say, paper wrapping or going unwrapped, because I still want some of that fat on the fat cap to render. And as I say, with it being a bottom-up cooker, I think we could do better on that fat cap. So foil boat it is. Back onto the pit. Probably come back in about an hour-ish. Obviously, I had to cook a brisket as my first cook on a pellet cooker, and I'm pretty happy with it. In terms of the texture, it's obviously nice and loose. In terms of the bark was the thing that I was most concerned about. But I really think the process that I took with the cold smoke at the beginning and stepping up through the temperatures, I think it's led to a pretty good looking brisket. And I don't think many people would tell that this was not cooked on an offset. So it's looking pretty good. There was a tear in the flat that I didn't point out when I trimmed it. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, and that is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out. So let's cut up this point end. As always, my favorite slice on a brisket. Looking good, looking nice and glistening. Can't really complain with that. I'm really happy with my trim work there as well. There's definitely a lack of smoke flavor. The moment you take a bite, or the moment I take a bite out of this particular brisket, may not be the same with yours. There's definitely smoke flavor. I think that pecan smoke is really good, really delicious. It's not particularly heavy. The bark, the fat render, really happy with. Just overall, I feel like people always say that pellet smokers don't have enough or a lot of smoke flavor. And even though that I smoked it pretty low and slow, built up as much smoke flavor as I could, there isn't a huge amount of smoke flavor going on. But that's maybe not the most important thing to everyone. Does it make it less good? I personally like more smoke, but I really do think anyone would be happy with that. Good fat render, reasonable smoke flavor, good amount of salt. Would I take every opportunity to cook on a Traeger if I wanted to impress? Probably not. But will I use it again? Definitely. If you're like I am, not long had a child, you haven't got a huge amount of spare time. If I no longer had an offset and I wanted to cook some barbecue, I mean, I wouldn't be mad at that. And my family definitely wouldn't care. Yeah, that turned out pretty good. I'm gonna cook some other stuff. I think it's gonna be good at smoking sausage. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another video, and it may be on this Traeger, may not be.